just wanted to ask you, Juan, one more question, because you are a bridge between the corporate media and independent media. I mean, you got your start as a journalist in Philadelphia. You were covering another journalist, Mumia Abu-Jamal. You covered the MOVE bombing there. You come to New York. You're with the New York Daily News. You lead a strike there. You're with the New York Daily News for 29 years, and but also doing Democracy Now!, coming out to cover the Battle of Seattle, and, you know, always a bridge in these two worlds. And I'm wondering about your observations about the changing dynamic and where independent media fits into the landscape.
Well, you know, independent media is critical. It's essential. It also has a long history. What I try to tell people is it just didn't start. You know, there was the working men's press of the 1830s. There were the muckrakers, Lincoln Steffens, Ida Tarbell, Ray Stannard Baker. The muckrakers of the early 20th century. There was the old left press of the 30s and 40s. There was the new left press of the 60s and the 70s, and then now there are the progressive and alternative forces, all non-commercial, all radical, all speaking truth to power in different generations. So there's a long tradition of an alternative, dissident, and radical press in America. And it's part of the whole story of the press in America, along with the commercial and the corporate press. And there's a third stream of the American media that I always try to remind people of, which is the press by people of color, because for 200 years, the Asian Americans, African Americans, Latinos, and Native Americans were systematically excluded from both the corporate and commercial press and the dissident and alternative press. So they had to create their own presses, the black press, the Latino press, the Asian American, and the Native American press, to be able to get their narrative out. So it's an ongoing battle as to who, as has been said, who gets to shape the narrative, people's understanding of themselves as a people, and what are the important events and the less important events. So there's a continuing battle over that, and I've been lucky to have worked in all three of these streams. I've worked in the corporate and commercial press, I've worked in the alternative and the dissident press, and I've worked in the press of people of color. So I have a sense of the broader view of what it is that the press in America or the media do. And of course, now we're in an age when everybody is a multimedia publisher and reporter. So we're in a whole new stage now. But the issue of the battle over the narrative continues, and in that the non-commercial, alternative, and radical press play a key role in constantly pushing the boundaries of what is the kind of news and information that the American people receive. That's not to say the corporate commercial press has all kinds of problems and it's terrible, but every once in a while they do some really good stuff. You know, and it's usually at the result of the work of particular reporters or editors or an enlightened publisher at a particular time in one place, but it's not systematic. It's not a regular attribute of that stream of the press, whereas the alternative and radical and alternative press is more systematically committed to challenging power, and that's what I think what sets it apart from the rest.
And everyone should read. And everyone should read Juan's book, News for All the People, The Epic Story of Race in the American Media, which is really the chronicle of press of color, of independent press in this country, the entire history, going back to the original Native American presses and the corporate media, going back to basically being, right, Juan, don't you would say, they were newspapers to let slaveholders know where their slaves had fled to. And also throughout the colonial period, a big portion of the content of colonial era newspapers was intelligence to the settlers as to what the Native Americans were up to. It was a way of holding the settlers together in their conquest of the land, and to try to beat back any kind of native opposition. So the colonial era papers were basically largely, race was a part of the content of the papers, either to continue to suppress and hold back the Africans that they had brought to this country, or to
defend themselves against the native peoples. So it's a long history. It's, it's nothing. There's nothing new under the sun. It takes different guises, and the technology changes and everything else. But it's a long-running battle. We're still fighting it, and I believe eventually we will win.
I wanted to go to Rick, because you also bridge these two. You come out of the deeply grassroots independent movement on the ground, covering grassroots movements like we saw at the Battle of Seattle. And now you are working in different spheres. You're going back and forth. And explain what it is you're doing and the kinds of films that you've been working on and the constraints you feel in these different worlds.
Amy, are you calling me a sellout?
I am not.
No, I think my 24-year-old self might, I don't know, in a way. I mean, I don't know, for me, so yeah, I have been, when the Iraq War started, I went to Iraq, we went to Iraq, our whole crew, to try to make the kind of film we had been making. I mean, we spent after Seattle, we traveled around the world and went to different front lines of the global war against neoliberalism, from Argentina, South Africa, Palestine, parts of Asia, and everywhere. And we helped establish independent media centers in all these places, and we tried to be the kind of filament of connection that linked together all these movements into one kind of, global understanding of struggle. When the Iraq War happened, we went to Iraq looking for the movement that would be that we would recognize in Argentina or elsewhere. We imagined we're going to find a feminist, like internationalist, probably mildly socialist, like resistance group who was, fighting against the American occupation, and of course that movement didn't exist. I mean, the decades of war and dictatorship had destroyed civil society, and the occupation destroyed civil society to the point where there was no place that we were invited to participate in or would want to participate in. I mean. And then there were attempts to organize soldiers in the U.S. I mean, some of them still exist about face and others, but they never. And there was a moment where they started to get some sort of purchase, and then the economic crisis happened, and that sort of ended. But so all of these organizing drives kind of, failed to gain the kind of traction that they had before. So we were left as a group who had always imagined ourselves to be the media wing of a global social movement, without a movement or a context or an audience that made any sense. And so we did the only thing we knew how to do, which was we tried to tell the story of the horror we were seeing, and we went bankrupt politically, emotionally, and economically trying to cover Iraq. And so we started to work for television, which is what you do when you're morally bankrupt. And so we made a dozen films, like short films that I thought were very important from this period of time, and ended up, making a feature at the end of that got a kind of attention inside of the establishment. It was nominated for an Oscar. It got a kind of attention that we, hadn't gotten before, and the whole media landscape, actually, I realized when I came back to the U.S., had been changed partially by what we had all done. I mean, the kind of independent documentary production that we were making created a market that literally didn't exist before. I think that's one. It's one important thing, I think, to remember. I mean, because it will be said many times over this conference that I think that indie media basically created YouTube and created Facebook and created Twitter. Like, it was the first open posting, user-generated content kind of site. And it was amazing and radical and full of potential, and then it was co-opted, contained, and fully recuperated by the capitalist system. And it happened over the course of a couple of years. But that is always going to happen, right? Terry Eagleton says, they'll hang Picasso on the walls of their banks if Picasso isn't part of a social movement that burns their banks down. And they will, every form of expression we come up with, they'll find a way to incorporate in the market. Anyway, there is now a massive market for nonfiction, like film production, that we came back and discovered after being lost in the wilderness for like a decade. And so we're seeking out, the places of intervention that seem the most powerful inside of the system, hoping that keeping our tools sharp and at our side here, the moment will come again when this amazing network we are part of re-articulates itself, and we can again be the media arm of a movement that is going to change the world in our lifetime.
And the film we're talking about, the film you came back to do is Dirty Wars, that you won a major award at Sundance and were nominated for an Oscar. And one of the great hopes right now is, well, one of the people you worked with, Jeremy Scahill, had a baby today.
Yes.
Little boy named Otto. But talking about the movements of today that are intersectional, like the climate crisis. Lorenzo, you were there on the ground at Standing Rock. Pipeline politics, the climate movement led by indigenous people now for so many years, and now the youth-led movement, Greta Thunberg, the 16-year-old Swedish climate activist, on her way to Spain, at least the latest place where it seems like the UN Climate Summit will be taking place. Since it started in Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro threw it out as soon as he became president, as he opens up the Amazon for business. Was going to be in Chile, but the mass protests there have led to the cancellation of it, and now it's going to be in Spain. She doesn't believe in flying, and so this young woman who helped to lead the Fridays for Future movement is on a catamaran with her dad. Some family is taking her as she put out a plea, how can I go back across the planet, to make her way to Madrid. But she is not the first young person. I mean, indigenous people, young and old, and it's something she highlights. When she came here to this country, she landed in New York, but very soon made her way to the Dakotas, to Pine Ridge Reservation and then Standing Rock, understanding how significant those struggles are. And you documented that, but before that, you were on the ground here in New York at Occupy Wall Street, talking about inequality. These are two remarkable people, by the way, Bolivian indigenous people who lost their 8-year-old daughter in 2003 and have sued the UN, have come to this country and have sued the former president and defense minister of Brazil, and their lawyer, Thomas Becker, from the Center for Constitutional Rights. And tune into Democracy Now! To find out what happens in their case, because a 3-judge panel just heard their case in Florida, and we will see what happens.
That wasn't my only experience with indie media, but I think it was in this film too, right? So yeah, I experienced a bunch of media makers, but I was always in an environment that was very not just media makers, right? There was lawyers there was human rights activists, there was this upswell of voices, all talking about their way of looking at how things are happening. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons I've taken, I guess, from the experience in Occupy Wall Street, is that these spaces that are created for independent media makers to come are also spaces where they get to talk to each other and learn from each other and hear their stories from their point of views, because everyone's experiencing life as themselves. I don't know what to tell you. Sorry. So there's a lot of work that has to be done so we can even understand each other. And so I think that in Occupy Wall Street, you had a lot of people who are willing to try to understand each other, but also were willing to say that we were going to change the world again. Everyone here, nobody was going around just to see maybe we might change it. No, we're going to change it. Why not? And so.
And you were live streaming this in 2011.
Oh yeah, 2011 was 2011 was the highlight time for social media. reach, you know? So if anybody's been using social media, you'll notice that everything is like organic reach has been shrinking. So around 2011, there was really a way to use these platforms that were still open because they were interested in building bases. They wanted more membership. And so everyone was just like, let's just use this stuff. It's so great. And it was, you know, we were able to reach so many people, like millions and millions and millions of people constantly every day, you know, but also nowadays that's not the case. It's completely different now. And again, that's something that I think we as in people who have been in movements or movement people have to acknowledge that the ground is shifting under our feet all the time. And if we're not looking at where we're standing, we don't know how to act from there. And so I think in Occupy Wall Street, that was something that we did a lot. It's just like acknowledging where we're at with very little, you know, like we had, you know, and it's interesting you're talking about the indie media model that sort of was there and it was open, everyone could participate. And I feel like in Occupy Wall Street, that's what we're trying to do. We're making like different media organizations. We're trying to like make these horizontal platforms, and we have these live streams, and people were making video, and everyone was working. And kind of what happened after that moment is that the only resources that were available for independent media makers was being individualistic makers, right? So you can go on YouTube and make your channel, put your face, build your brand. YouTube's monetized, you can get some money, right? And that didn't exist for anybody else. So like all the people out there who are trying to like really resist the system by creating something different had no resources available. And the people who were willing to like be like, all right, well, I guess I just gotta have some ad roll, you know, and then like some clickbait, and then that should be great. You know, they were able to be successful in this world of capitalism and individualism. And so I don't know if that clears anything up, but I think in the end, like Occupy Wall Street was extremely formative because I was just lucky enough to meet a bunch of people who were a part of indie media and who were willing to sit down and just teach me and sit down and explain to me things. And sometimes those explanations weren't very good. I mean, I learned how to edit video. Somebody tried to teach me how to edit video, and we were like, we're on a rooftop. There was a bottle of whiskey involved, and it was very confusing, you know. But they still spent 2-3 hours with me trying to explain, you know, through the haze what we were doing. And so in the end, I think that's what movements provide and what spaces provide is just the ability to know where you can go to find information, you know, and we try to replicate that on the internet a lot. But I just want to keep bringing it to, as you heard everyone else say, like all these things that happened that you've seen happen took so much organizing, so much face-to-face organizing, conversations and thought and imagination. And it's something that I feel like we're very lacking right now is imagination. Like, we're in a situation where we have to imagine a way out of it. And we have to be able to offer each other something, anything, that they can grasp onto. And so I think in you know, these different centers and these different movements, like that's something I'm always hearing people trying to do is trying to this sort of give a vision of where is the place we want to be instead of constantly being stuck in these things that we don't want. Because we all know, you know, like our organization does a lot of work against white supremacy and the white nationalism, neo-Nazism, like all this stuff is real. It's happening in this country, and that's you know, by my very existence, I resist that. You know, like as an indigenous person, we're always resisting those things, and all these communities are always talking about those things, and I think that is just what we need. I don't know how to explain it for us. Like we need people to come together and just talk and acknowledge that maybe they might not have the answer. And that's okay, because like we need to take the time to work our way to it. And it's frustrating because we don't have time. We live in a society that's time, like everything is instant. Context does not exist, you know. So I think that in the end, like Occupy Wall Street, all those indie media makers who were there, what we're able to do is provide context for that movement. And so when it happened, there was a way for it to be told, and someone could look back and be like, oh, this is what they're doing, this is what they're doing, this is what they're doing, this is what they're doing. And I think in the end, that's like the constant battle we're trying right now to fight is the fact that everyone seems to think they're living in this context, this lack of context world where everything is just beginning, everything is just a start. And somehow we have to break through this like wave of instantaneous gratification to get people to just talk for a second and understand that we are connected to this time that goes back so far, and that we are products of that. And I think once we can do those things, we can really provide a path forward, you know, because we can't go back. There's nothing, it's already done. You're like, we're here now, and where do we go to? And so I don't know if that answers anything, but.
I just want to say, coming briefly out of Occupy Wall Street, one of the things we did at Democracy Now!, that was September 17th, and so many thousands of people streamed into Zuccotti Park holding signs that said, I am Troy Davis.
Yeah.
And so we flew right out from New York down to Georgia, and we set up outside the death row prison where Troy Davis was scheduled to die. In fact, it was September 21st, 2011. And I went with my colleague Renee Feltz and Hani Massoud and our whole team there. The astounding feeling of being there. All the corporate media trucks were down the road just to announce in a 30-second or 15-second soundbite what would happen at the end of the night, the execution of Troy Davis. But we were there to bring out the voices of 1,000 people, the kids from Spelman and Morehouse who were holding candles, human rights activists from around the world who would come to and surround the family and protest what was happening. And what we started hearing as we just broadcast nonstop, not knowing what would happen that night, is at St. Mary's Church in Harlem, they were broadcasting Democracy Now! On the walls. In libraries, college libraries, kids were setting up their computer screens in a row to just see what was happening, because with all the corporate media and all of its reach, no one was covering this. If they were lucky, they would find out the verdict at the end of the night. And how Occupy Wall Street was a great inspiration for us. But I wanted to end with Henda. We have just 2 minutes. But if you could also talk about your role as an Arab woman and your colleagues, Arab women in a male-dominated society, not that we're much different in the United States even still, but what it meant to bring out women's voices as well through indie media.
Okay, it's a very important fight, and I think the revolution contributes a lot to make this fight visible in Tunisia and in the Arab world. But I will talk about Tunisia because it's quite different situation. I will maybe give an example about a demonstration in 2016. I was in a region called Kasserine, between Kasserine and Sidi Bouzid, so it was the origin of the revolution. And the police repression were very, very violent in this moment. So every day people go out to demonstrate, and it was a Sunday, and the movement, this social movement, decided that Sunday will be for women, only for women, and it will be 1 hour, and they will go to the street to protest against police violence and to ask the police to release their sons and brothers and husbands. So I was there a Saturday evening, and I started filming and interviewing people who are preparing this demonstration. And then the next day in the morning, we didn't know that how many people will come, how many women. It was a small village where women don't go outside, don't participate in any political activity, nothing. So, so in 30 minutes, 1 hour, about 200 women came to the demonstration. It was really amazing to see that, and it was a surprise for men. A huge surprise. So they were happy in the beginning, and they started walking in the street, the main street of the village, and of course repeating what men said first, that we are against police violence, please release our kids, na na na. And then slowly these ladies and these young women started to create new songs against the patriarchal society, and against men who are, you know, their lives, and the injustice to be a woman, and the men who are maybe don't allow them to participate in the political life. And it was really amazing for me to see that and to witness that and to film it and to show it and to write about it. Even after I published it in a way, some of the activists I know were very unhappy about it, and they called me to make pressure that I remove it, but it was really great. So since 2016, women take leadership in social movement, and we start talking about LGBT rights and women's rights in social movements, because it's very, very important. And I think also migrants in Tunisia, because they are getting, more and more migrants are in Tunisia now, so we have this also a problem in Tunisia, and we have to talk about it. And I think that the new generation is changing, and they want to to do something new. They see social movement differently. It's not the syndicate movement back in the 18. It's not also my generation. You know, the new social movements were based on human rights only. It's all together. It has to be together. And I think what is happening now in Lebanon, in Algeria, in Sudan, especially in Sudan and in other Arabic countries, in Iraq also, it shows that there is something, there is a common lesson, message or fight in all these countries, which is we want everything, not only one thing. We want women's rights, we want social justice, we want freedom, we want everything in the same time, and it has to be in the same time.
On that note, we want to say thank you so much to our panel, and we hope you stay tomorrow through the day for fascinating discussions about what's happening with the independent media movement and media in resistance in this country and around the world. Thank you so much.
I saw a picture of little Otto.
And they agreed to abide by these rules. And the World Trade Organization is, in a sense, the court that decides when there's a dispute between corporations, between governments, how will it come down. It's very instructive to look at the record of all the cases that the WTO has ruled on, whether it's the sea turtles versus corporations, the dolphins versus corporations, the small farmers versus corporations. In every single case, the WTO has ruled on the side of big corporations and against people in the environment.
Cards are stacked against the small farmers. Cards are stacked against anyone who is on the periphery of the system. It has really become a trade which benefits the corporations at the expense of the poor.
The first 100 agreements by the WTO were all for the benefit, all on the side of rich multinational corporations, and against public regulations, the environment, labor, consumer interests and rights, and also democratic sovereignty.